Welcome, everybody, to today's session, End the Battle Between Security and Productivity. I am joined today with my colleague, David Holmes, talking about a super important topic in the future of work and in cybersecurity today, which is how to balance the need for securing enterprise data and your organization as a whole with end user productivity. And so this has been a major challenge for many organizations. Today, we're going to tackle some topics around employee experience, engagement, productivity, and also how to balance that with a modern security strategy. So David and I both work for a company called Forrester. If you don't know Forrester, we are a market research firm based out of Boston, Massachusetts. And we work with business and technology leaders to drive customer-obsessed strategies for growth. And so I sit on our infrastructure and operations team. I've been at Forrester now for 7 years. So I think I'm the lone IT ops person that doesn't work in security at this conference, but I cover all end user computing at Forrester. I'm one of our lead researchers for remote working, and I also do a lot of work on technology experience for employees, which is why I was the representative on the technology EX component of this research with my colleague, David Holmes. So David, do you want to introduce yourself and bring the audience through our agenda today?
Yeah, hey everybody, it's David at Forrester. So I am an analyst on Forrester's security and risk team, coming up on my second year at Forrester, but it feels like 14 years. So I think it's like dog years, like your time as an analyst at Forrester. But I cover things like security, zero trust network access, what Forrester calls a zero trust edge, or what you'll see in the market as SASE. And I cover DDoS and network security controls and crypto and DNS and a whole bunch of stuff. I'm really, really excited to be here with Andrew to talk about ending that battle between productivity and security, right? And this is something that has been a challenge my entire life, is when security gets in the way of productivity. And what we're positing in the report that goes along with this talk is that not only can you end that battle, you can actually, when you do zero trust or do cybersecurity correctly, you can actually improve productivity and improve the employee experience while you improve your security posture. So we're going to lay this out really simply. We're going to talk about what we think of as measuring productivity, the EX part, right? And then we'll talk about and define zero trust in the cybersecurity part, and then we'll try to tie those together. We'll give real world examples, and then we'll leave you with what can you do in the next 60 to 90 days to get started. But one of the things I wanted to mention before we move on is that Andrew and I actually started this research prior to the pandemic. Right, I think it was the company Christmas party in 2019.
Our last in-person interaction. I think it was with you, David.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Seems like forever ago. But we actually started this research prior to the pandemic. But everything that happened during the pandemic has, I think, proven us out and given us real good concrete examples to show you. So I'm going to turn it back to you for a little bit, Andrew, to explain what we mean by EX.
So EX is a really important research area at Forrester, and also a really important area to focus on as an organization as you go into 2021. We define employee experience as the sum of all the perceptions that an employee has working at the company. It could be perceptions around a manager relationship. It could be perceptions around collaboration with their coworkers, with technology. It's really basically everything that they experience on a daily basis, the sum of all those things. And does that make them happier, or does that make them want to leave your company and go somewhere else? And so one of the things that you'll see throughout our presentation is the importance of technology in that overall employee experience, in terms of how it either contributes to better engagement of your workforce or contributes to the opposite, which is burnout and attrition in your workforce. And specifically, we're going to talk about how security really can play a role in driving an employee towards more engagement or to more burnout. And so I'll make that connection here, and then we will apply some of the best practices around zero trust technology and strategy as a whole, as far as how do you overcome some of this tension between security and productivity. So let's dive in a little bit. First, I'll say that the stakes are incredibly high when it comes to these two topics. So the thing that really launched this whole research stream for me and was really illuminating with clients is I had a conversation with an IT director in a large financial services firm. I believe it was in the US. And he said, I'm worried that if we don't give employees more choice, there's going to be a full-on revolt in our organization. People are going to leave. And they were starting to hear this in the exit interviews, that the technology that they were given on a daily basis was not allowing them to do their jobs effectively. It was a very standard, PC to employee type of environment, lockdown corporate image, very little self-service, very little autonomy overall. And so the employees wanted more flexibility, something that was being driven a lot by consumerization of IT that we've heard about for so long. And so for this organization, trying to solve this tension between what do we need to do from a compliance, risk, and security perspective on our environment versus what do employees actually want was a major challenge for them that they needed to overcome. And we posit three things in our research that are major business outcomes from not solving this issue. So number one is engagement is going to increase and decrease, not increase, across your workforce. And what we found statistically is that the most engaged employees also are much more likely to be satisfied with their company's security policies. We'll show some of the data that proves that point. We also found that employees will dodge the security blanket if it gets in the way of them being productive. There is some pretty horrifying and eye-opening data about the frequency and willingness to circumvent security policies in the name of productivity, which we'll also show you. And thirdly, which is really important as you start to come out of this pandemic, is innovation will suffer. And why will that occur? It will occur because organizations will spend months, if not years, going through RFPs to make sure that they can, handle the newest and greatest technology that employees want to bring into the workforce, that they can adopt it in a secure way. If you don't have a modern security architecture that allows you to take on things quickly and do it in a secure manner, what you're going to find is that your competition is going to start to take on new technologies and start to outcompete you in markets because their employees are going to be way more effective at getting their work done and contributing to the company overall. So just to wrap things up, the stakes are really high. We need to start thinking about how do we end this war here. So diving a little bit into the employee experience overall, we have at Forrester what's called our Employee Experience Index. And this was developed by an analyst by the name of Dave Johnson on our Future of Work team. And essentially the Employee Experience Index measures employee engagement on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 meaning I'm most engaged, I'm very productive, I'm likely to stay at my company. 0 being I'm not engaged at all, probably going to be gone in the next couple of months, that sort of thing. And so what we found that there are a variety of different psychological factors that impact whether someone is engaged towards that 100 or disengaged. And they roughly break down into these three buckets of empowerment, which is all about how does the organization give you clarity of your role, give you the right manager resources, et cetera, to be successful. That's the most influential on the overall employee experience. Inspiration, which is all about alignment of my personal values with the mission and values of the company, feeling like my work matters, that sort of thing. And enablement, which is all technology. So this is one of the biggest findings of this research, is that 30% of what drives the employee experience are actually technology related factors here. So you can see 6 of the most statistically relevant factors for improving employee experience or impacting employee experience from a technology perspective on the screen here.
Andrew, can I put you on the spot? We didn't rehearse it, but these data points here, were they collected prior to the pandemic?
They were, yep.
So you think these numbers are probably even more skewed toward technology in the remote work world?
I would say absolutely. We haven't done the analysis yet, but technology is literally the lifeline between the employee and the organization now. There's a broad shift towards remote working, and you'll see some data later on that we're going to share around that we expected this to continue to increase. So absolutely, I think if we were to look back at this data now and rerun the engagement survey, we probably see it's potentially even higher than 30% now. But the end goal here is to drive a purpose worker. That's what we call a fully engaged worker, someone who is bringing themselves to work in the fullest way possible every single day. And so technology plays a major role in that. And one of the really interesting things that we found in the research is that security directly impacts engagement as well. So if you look here, the light blue bars are your most engaged employees. And so 89% of your highly engaged employees are satisfied with company technology security policies. Just 25% of the lowest engaged employees are satisfied with that overall policy. So there's a huge gap. If you are not engaged, you're likely not to be satisfied with those security policies overall. And the same thing occurs for things like information access. There's a 63% gap there. Satisfaction with collaboration technology, 66%. And so there are a variety of different technologies that we've looked at as far as their impact on overall engagement. Security policies and satisfaction with those policies are one of the most decisive for someone's satisfaction with technology and engagement in the workplace overall. So it's actually has borne out. There's a correlation. Yep. That's borne out in a lot of the data here. And the reason, the follow-on question to that is, why does this matter so much? When you think about overall engagement, one of the most illuminative pieces of research that I've read is from the work of Teresa Amabile, who's a PhD out of Harvard, who says that, employees are most happy when they're making progress every day in work that they feel is meaningful. So it is about productivity overall that's driving higher levels of satisfaction and engagement. Think about it in your own life. How good do you feel at the end of the day if you go home and you've just been procrastinating all day and you've gotten nothing done versus a day where you were super focused and you got a lot of stuff off your plate? You feel a lot more engaged on the latter, I guarantee you. And so this is one of the reasons why when we ask folks, why do you sometimes ignore or go around your company's security policies? 34% said, they had to collaborate with peers outside of the company. It's related to productivity. And 33% said it's the most efficient way of doing what I need to get done. 31% saying that their policies are strict or unreasonable in nature. So if an employee feels like their productivity is being impacted by security policies, they will circumvent that. And interestingly, we didn't include this data point here, but 10% of employees admit that they would go around a security policy if they knew how to. So it doesn't sound like a huge number, but if you think if 10% of your workforce is saying, if I knew how to get around this policy, I would absolutely do it. That's why this conversation is so important, because lack of productivity leads to lack of security as well. And it also leads to burnout. Here are your 10 predictors of burnout as statistically proven through the Employee Experience Index. You can see at the bottom here, these are the top 10. Security policies hinder productivity. So security policies are basically the number 10 driver of employee burnout in the workplace, which is high considering all the other factors that can contribute to overall burnout. Not the most correlated with burnout overall, but definitely playing a role. And so as you start to think about productivity in your organization, you're really going to have to start thinking about how does security get in the way of people getting their work done. And so one of the major posits that we made with this research, and I'm going to hand it over to David in just a moment, is that a new modern security strategy, what we call a zero trust at Forrester, is a way to help overcome a lot of these issues and resolve some of that fundamental tension. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to hand it over to David. I'll probably chime in as well, just to talk a little bit about how ZT specifically can help you with your employee experience strategy. Over to you, David.
Andrew, fantastic. Thanks for setting that up. I'm going to back up one slide real quick because I wanted to look at the two numbers for security policies hindering productivity and too many meetings on my calendar. Who doesn't hate that, right? Those are that's almost the same number that's going to drive employee burnout. So I just wanted to highlight that. So
I bet that would be higher this year as well.
I think so too. I think they're both really high. What a tough year it's been. Okay, so in 2 slides, I just wanted to, if you weren't familiar with Forrester's Zero Trust, right? This was a paper that came out of Forrester in 2009. And I remember I was a younger man, almost maybe Andrew's age, when I first read the paper, and I was reading a bootleg copy of this paper, and I was like, these Forrester people get it. This is everything we have done wrong in security, and this is the way forward, right? So the paper lays out 3 core principles for a zero trust model of information security. And the first one was consider all networks untrusted. There shouldn't be a part of your network where you say, Oh, well, it's coming from that part of the network, so I'm just going to trust it, right? And that's less common today that you see networks like that, partly because of the advocacy of zero trust. And another way to think about this principle is trust the identity, right? Establish and trust the identity. Don't just trust a network connection because it's coming from a place you consider trusted. A second core principle is least privilege access must be enforced. Only give the privileges to somebody that they need in order to do their job, right? And then if you need to elevate them temporarily or to do a certain task, then do so then, but then revoke it later, right? And then the third one is, well, the paper didn't use the phrase assume breach, that came later. That's what it was really talking about, is assume that attackers will eventually get in if they're not in already, and have the machinery in place so that you can detect them and then hopefully block the lateral movement, right? Or contain the blast radius. And then if you wanted to make a bumper sticker out of zero trust, you would say, never trust, always verify. As a matter of fact, if you ever want to sound smart at a party, right, you could just say, never trust, always verify. People in the know will know what you mean. Now, we haven't sat still at Forrester for since 2009. We have somewhat evolved zero trust to make it a little bit less about the network, which is what the initial papers were really talking about, and more to talk about the different elements, right? And so this is how we visualize zero trust today in what we think of as an extended ecosystem with 7 domains, right? And the reason we do this is we put data at the center because we think zero trust is all about protecting the data, not about protecting a network. However, you need more than just data security. You need to have security controls around the things that interact with the data, which can broadly be categorized into 4 domains: people, devices, networks, and workloads. And so when you think of people, you might think of technology groups like identity and access management, right? Or workloads could be applications, and you could think of application security. Or for networks, you might think of technologies like microsegmentation. And for devices, you might think of device security. And throughout all that, we think you need to have some kind of visibility system, or what we call network analytics and visibility, so that you can see events and correlate them through the different domains. So for example, if David was put on a personal action notice and may leave the company soon, but also started downloading a whole bunch of data on his laptop, maybe those two things are related and you need to have some kind of visibility between those. And then lastly, we think you need to be able to orchestrate and automate everything because the number of threats coming at you are too high. So anyway, just in those 2 slides, right, that was zero trust, the 3 core principles, and then here's how we can operationalize it and think about it today. All right, so we have set up EX and we have set up ZT. Right, and now let's talk about how ZT can improve the EX part. So the pandemic happened, right, and nobody was prepared except for, I guess, the people who are already remote workers were prepared. But Andrew, I don't know if you wanted to speak to some of these stats here.
Yeah, so I think, if you weren't thinking about zero trust and how to implement that to improve user experience in 2019, you were definitely thinking about it by the end of 2020, right? Because, this data that has left the data center, that is now traveling to home networks, to personally owned devices, it's never coming back. Our personal, Forrester's take on the overall increase is that 300% expected increase in permanent full-time remote workers. So in the US, that means 1 in 5. Typically, it's on a yearly basis, 7% of US workers are full-time. We anticipate that's going to be 21%. And so you're going to have to deal with this challenge, like it or not. That's the way that the world is moving. And, most organizations are going to be hybrid in nature. We've said 60% of organizations will be hybrid, but that means that you're still going to have to protect that data wherever it goes, whether it's on your corporate network or whether it's in, a coffee shop or in a library or at someone's home. It's never coming back. And so we knew that people weren't really prepared for this. 47% responded to our survey in the early part of COVID saying, our infrastructure wasn't ready to handle this. And so we've had so many different conversations, both David and myself, on what are those technology investments that you can make to, 1, improve your security and make it more flexible for a remote work environment, but 2, also enable someone to be very productive in basically any circumstance.
Perfect segue into this first thing. So here's the first example we have of how zero trust can improve EX. And as Andrew was hinting, that less than half of the organizations that we surveyed said that they were equipped to handle so much remote work. And guess who all of those people who were not equipped to handle called? They called Andrew and myself. And I basically sat on the phone for months at a time talking to people who said, look, our VPNs just can't handle this, all this remote work. And they want to, can I split tunnel my traffic, right? Can I just send all of my internet bound traffic out to the internet, but still keep my VPN going? And that was a conversation I had all the time. And I still have that with clients today. But I tried to tell them, you know what, that's suboptimal from a security perspective, because while you may be improving your employees' experience with their internet browsing, you're actually just providing a tunnel for them to get infected, and then for the malware to go right into your perimeter. So don't do that, right? And so they would say, well, what am I supposed to do? The answer, fortunately, was a technology called Zero Trust Network Access. So you may have seen this prior to the pandemic. It's called Secure Remote Access, but it is applying zero trust principles to be able to create some kind of access that allows a remote worker to connect to the on-prem applications that they need, right? So for many organizations that I talk to, the applications that people use day to day are ones that are, they're up in the cloud, right? They're the Workdays of the world, Salesforce, et cetera. But they still have a few on-prem applications. And having a zero trust network access was one of the things where they were able to say, okay, we're going to use this, and maybe in combination with like a cloud delivered secure web gateway, we'll combine those two things, and then all of our remote workers will be unhindered by our VPN capacity, and they'll have a mostly straight path out to the internet while still being protected. But then when they want to come into our on-prem to access, whatever resources we still have on-prem, that they can do so. And so this is a conversation I still have with people every day. And remember that we started this research prior to the pandemic, and then this was one of the signature technologies that happened, right? And so very likely at your organization, you may already be doing this, right? If you have signed up with one of the many, there's probably 30 vendors that offer a solution like this, or Microsoft itself offers a solution like this. You may already be doing this, and ideally it works so well that you don't even notice, right? And that's what we're trying to get at. Now, one of the things I wanted to make clear here is that if you are a security professional and attending this conference, very likely you are, right? You might have been familiar with Zero Trust for the last 10 years, and you might have seen that, it's been creeping up in adoption. It was popular. And while it's become the sort of de facto mindshare cybersecurity strategy, you may have to look pretty far and wide before you find somebody who's actually implemented it, right? And one of the things that was missing, that Zero Trust was missing, was a clear business driver for why to do it, right? Many security professionals will say, I clearly recognize this. This is a security strategy that's built around the theme of reducing the threat surface. And I totally get that. That's great. But how do I sell that? How do I get the budget to do that, right? What you actually need was a business driver. And here comes the biggest externality of my entire career, the pandemic, where everybody goes to work from home and then nobody can get any work done. And then somebody at headquarters is going, look, we're losing millions of dollars a day because none of our employees can work. Why don't we adopt Zero Trust? Boom. That's like there's the business driver that took this off. So many companies today are they're dating Zero Trust by using a Zero Trust network access solution. And before I move on here, Andrew, did you have any comments about this one?
Otherwise, I would just say thank you so much for taking all the VPN inquiries last year.
I was the new guy at the time. I felt like
you were Mr. VPN last year.
Kill the VPN. Kill the VPN. All right, I think you might have something. We'll both have some things to say about this one, but I'll let you start.
All right. Okay. So, if we look back at some of the drivers of engagement for employee experience, one of the top ones is access to task critical information to do my job, ability to get stuff that helps me learn about my customers, learn about my colleagues, really just contribute to my company. And the biggest thing that gets in the way of this is the traditional password. And the especially with some of the more difficult requirements around password length and complexity and how often you have to shift out that password, that can be a huge mess. And especially when you start thinking about a multi-OS or multi-device environment where every time I update a domain password on my primary laptop, I have to do it on my smartphone and every other thing that I'm using. And so passwords are one of the key areas that you can start thinking about as part of your zero trust strategy. One, eliminate them because they're less secure than a passwordless form of authentication. And two, think about reducing the cognitive load for that employee as they're thinking about, what is my password? I know I changed it last week, but I don't remember what it is. All of a sudden, I'm super distracted and can't focus on my most important work. So when we think about sort of modern zero trust security with regards to the password, obviously there's things like multi-factor authentication, which continue to be, highly asked about amongst our clients. Biometrics and device factors are also a form that can help to decrease that overall need. Facial recognition, I think, will be something important once we get rid of the masks.
That was going great until the mask thing.
Yeah, it was going great.
I lost my Touch ID right. So the Touch ID was a perfect example of security helping. Right, your finger was about to touch that button anyway, and so instead of having to enter a PIN like we used to have to, it would just authenticate you based on the button you were about to touch. And same with the Face ID was supposed to be was instead of putting in an 8-digit PIN. You were going to lift this up toward your eyes anyway. So that's the example. But I wanted to rewind people so some of the older people might remember this. Remember back in the late 90s when we had different passwords for everything, right? And the average person who worked at a corporation might have to quote, quote, remember like 17 or 22 different passwords. And these things would expire every 90 days. And so people would just, I can't remember 19 passwords. I'm just going to use the same password, right? Think of how far we have come since those days, right? I worked in the whole SSO business for a long time, and it was such a pain. It was just awful. But now, because of the standards like OAuth and Federation and SAML and all that stuff, Andrew was saying, I have to change my password because many of us only really have one password now. It's like a corporate password. And here we are right on the verge of talking about, could we get rid of this last one password? And sometimes I think we forget how far we have come. Like when you go sit down to your computer today, you might be faced with, here's my 15 apps. And you don't have to log into each one of them, right? If you have to log into a single one separately, you might be like, God, that's so old timey. Who does that anymore, right? At least that's what you should be thinking. So we've actually come a huge way. Now we're talking about, could we get rid of this last password, right? And so if you remember back in those days, people couldn't remember 19 passwords. They'd forget them. They have to call somebody, and that person would be like, I'm on call for 2 weeks, after hours, just so I can reset passwords. And it was the number one IT ticket for like over a decade. And now we have gotten to the point where we almost reduced it. And I would like to celebrate the fact that we've come so far, and we're right on the verge of being able to say no more passwords, right? Okay. I know we could talk about this stuff all day, but I'm going to move to the next one just so we don't run out of time.
All righty.
All right.
So I can start off with this one since it's very end user computing focused here. So trends in endpoint management and endpoint security specifically. And David showed the graph of different elements that interact with data in a zero trust model. One of them is devices, and I think we haven't paid as much attention to devices in the zero trust model. As David mentioned, is very network focused, but I think we ought to be paying more attention to a modern security and endpoint management strategy when it comes to those devices overall. And so there's two major trends that I want to highlight here that are zero trust oriented that also have an impact on the user experience. And the first one is this endpoint management strategy. So if you're not familiar with this, certainly go reach out to your EUC leader across the aisle over the next week or so, just to learn a little bit about modern management of endpoints. And so the traditional way of doing this, if you're not familiar, is domain joining the endpoint, pushing out patches, updates, all of that stuff via the VPN, and using an on-prem, endpoint management tool in order to, do policy configuration, all of that stuff. And that is completely changing. And it's moving very much towards the cloud, utilizing mobile device management APIs instead of kind of your traditional group policies to do management. And so this overall shift actually has a pretty big impact on the overall user experience. First of all, it doesn't require you to domain join and receive all your patches via a VPN, which is, by the way, as we already mentioned, already completely full as a result of the pandemic. And so if you're pushing out patches that way, it's going to have a really terrible impact on the user experience. If I can push that out over the air, it gives me more flexibility to ensure that I can patch those endpoints remotely. People can work effectively in a mobile setting. And then the second area is that it gives me opportunity to bring in different types of devices. The APIs from the major OEM operating systems are consistently getting more and more granular, and our ability to go out and just hook into those APIs and manage those devices over the internet is just getting better. And so we have an opportunity to provide more autonomy and choice for the user by making the shift towards modern management. And then the second area that I would call out here is a major shift that we're seeing with endpoint security point products. And a lot of that starting to shift into the native operating system, and leveraging less bolt-on technologies, third-party tools, and more of the native operating system security capabilities enforced through, let's say, an MDM or unified endpoint management tool. And so a lot of that has to do with performance of the device. I talked with one of our US government clients, and they came to me and said, on average, it takes employees 20 to 30 minutes to boot up a workstation every single morning because the amount of security agents that we have loaded onto the device, right? That's just too much. That is too much to enable productivity at the beginning of the day, right? And so the more that we start to embrace sort of native security functionality, the less of an impact those third-party tools have. And so all of this is in the name of reducing some of this complexity. You see down here, some of the biggest information security challenges in organizations are complexity of the IT environment. So if you can expand and modernize your endpoint management security strategy, you're also going to have an impact on the user experience. So David, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what you said. And I recognize that some of what we just talked about there was like, well, this will definitely make the IT people, their jobs easier and better. But especially that move to native, where we're seeing that on the security side as well. And that's not me recommending that. I'm just saying a lot of our clients that we talk to seem to be opting for the native device security, which appears to be getting better to the point where they're happy with it, and it enables higher productivity. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Okay, so we have provided in the very last slide, I think it's like 2 from now, some links to a lot of the reports, especially the report that we just mentioned here, Enhance the Employee Experience with Zero Trust. And we recommend that people can, if you are in IT ops, you might want to reach out to your security people even more so than you have been already, because if they're not, they may or may not be on board with this concept of security done right can actually improve productivity, right? They may look at you like that's crazy, but you just tell them to watch this video. Like these two guys at Forrester figured this all out, and they have the numbers to prove it. So what do you think people should do this month, Andrew?
So I think some of the major things you can do are, one, figure out all the device agents that you have for endpoint management and security. See if there's overlap between them. Do you have duplicates? What does that look like? What is the impact on the overall performance? That can be a quick way to get some performance improvements overall, especially if you feel like you're covered from a security perspective. The other thing that we hear a lot about, especially during the pandemic, is employee listening, and really giving a chance for the employee to give feedback around the experience. And so this is something that you could do with employees directly, or you could do with IT ops to really discover, how are these security policies actually impacting productivity? What sorts of things are you running into on a daily basis? What's super frustrating to the point where you need to get up and leave your desk because you're so mad about not being able to access something, right? So get that user feedback up front, and that'll help prioritize some areas. Over the next 3 months, David, you want to take this one?
Sure. So we're working with a lot of clients who are either doing a digital transformation, right, or accelerating their movement into the cloud. But they're also looking strategically at how, because remember what Andrew said about remote work increasing by 300%. you cannot treat remote workers as second-class citizens anymore. Whatever you do for them, you actually have to do whatever you do for the non-work at home, the on-prem people, you have to do for everybody, right? So I guess the theme of that is treat everyone the same and give them the best security and employee experience that you can in order to keep up their productivity. All right, so I hope you can read this, but if you can't hear, here's our email addresses: ahewitt@forrester.com and dholmes@forrester.com. And then the last slide here you'll see is links to a lot of the research that we referenced. And I just wanted to thank everybody for coming to this talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, David.